2:30 in the morning where I live. I'm starting to feel it. So, quality. I talk a lot about quality in the work that I do in the States, and I'm going to talk about it with you guys a little bit from the perspective of how I know it from where I live. And I think it's probably applicable because from what I hear, no matter where people are from here, is that the stories are the same of what is happening everywhere when it comes to the modern approach to meat. So, but I want to take for a moment, I want to take 15 seconds literally for people to think inside themselves and try to remember either one of the earliest memories or one of the most powerful food memories that you have. So you've got 15 seconds starting now. So what are some of the memories that people come up with?
Cooking hot dogs when I was 7, that were like pre-packaged, like sausages with batter, so in New Zealand we call them hot dogs. Cooking them in the kitchen and with chips, and then eating them, and then getting sick from it. And being spewed up, and it's like, it's not my best food memory, but it's my earliest food memory.
Food poisoning is his earliest.
It's a hard one to forget.
Yeah.
Other people?
A dish I had at Noma with pumpkin.
Pumpkin?
And caviar and whey sauce.
Why?
Because it was that delicious that I almost cried. It was so good.
It was a flavor of a strawberry that I picked in an edible garden. And it was like just the flavor. It was just, all my senses went wild when I had the taste of it. And also it was an healthy environment because everything in this garden was edible. And it was very impressive.
Yeah, dairy products from Siberia, where I grew up, which felt like I never ever found that kind of dairy products anywhere. So that's really my childhood taste. And every time I go back there, I try to find those products again.
So, strawberries is one of actually the such a common one. And, you know, the thing that weaves this all together for a lot of people with memories, food is one of the most powerful components that return us to a time and a place in our life. You know, we have these briny explosions from the first time that we had an olive. We have the aroma from our childhood kitchen when our parents would be making something. And, you know, for me, a lot of the time it has to do with the smell of tomato plants. And and this morning when I was awake at 4:30 in the morning, when all of you guys were asleep, and I was wondering if I should be running circles on the pitch inside, but it was too small, so I went for a walk and I ended up in the garden, and I was like, that smell of tomato plants for me returns me to my childhood where my parents had a greenhouse and these sort of things like that. So, you know, there's these sweet and these sour and these briny and all these flavors that come together along with the olfactory component that we have. And when we smell something, it can return us to a time and a place more effectively than pretty much any other sensation that we have. And this is part of the important thing about flavor within food. It hooks us into creating these really individual memories that end up signifying important points in time in which we've had these experiences. And within that, you know, we have one component of flavor, and then to support that we also have the aspect of texture. And when we think about texture, you know, texture is another component. It was sort of like, you know, what was the sensation of that strawberry when she ate it when she was a kid? Or what was the taste of that incredible steak that you had at a certain point? Or for you, what was the experience of having the briny explosion of caviar combined with however, you know, they were doing it? And that sort of texture that's there is also part of this experience that we have. And so you have flavor and you have texture, and these two things have this relationship together. But texture supports the experience that we have with flavor. And without texture, you know, flavor can still carry us into this aspect of having formed memories around food. But without flavor, texture can't really bring us to that same point in time. We can't really have these same sort of memories that we can formulate with food if we don't have the flavor that's there in order to create these powerful experiences. So I talk about this because these are two really important qualities when it comes to meat. Flavor and texture. And what people don't really understand is that these things have an inverse relationship in a sense. And why that is has to do with the underlying reasons of how we actually experience flavor when it comes to meat and how that develops. Texture is something that can happen at later. We can always address issues that have to do with texture. But flavor within meat is something that happens when the animal is alive. And we can never imbue more flavor into meat once that animal is dead. And when we think about that, the things that produce flavor within meat, the things that actually, so I'm going to back up a little bit. So when we think about meat itself, we know about this composition of meat at a cellular basis where we have fibers, and we know that we have fat cells, and we know that we have connective tissue and fascia, and and I'm going to assume that everyone in the room has a general understanding of that those are things that come together to make meat. Well, inside of those things, we have to take into account a family of things that are called pre-flavor compounds. And pre-flavor compounds are these chemicals that develop within muscle structure when the animal is alive. And these are the things that later on are able to develop flavor when the animal is dead through oxidation, through recombination within heat, through the introduction of other sort of elements that are around it, especially when we're talking about curing, long-term things like that. It's so important to have these potential for flavor inside the lean meat itself, along with the fat. And those two things are very different. And the things that promote flavor within meat are active movement. So you have an animal that has access to natural behavior. It's able to move around a pasture. It's able to exhibit natural behavior. It's able to interact with the world around it as it was meant to. What that does is it means that it has strong muscles. And the stronger the muscles are and the more muscle works, the more potential for flavor it has. When we think about the areas of a body, the areas of a carcass, that are the most flavorful muscles, what comes to mind for people?
Cheeks.
Cheeks. What?
Shanks.
Shanks. Neck. Like, these are areas that are in constant work. Heart, another one. When you think about those are areas of the body that are under constant workload. And what's happening there is that the workload itself is developing all these pre-flavor compounds within the meat. Of course, what's also with that is that you have an increase in connective tissue, which then impacts texture. Cheeks, you can't turn them into steaks, Neck, you can't do that either. Shanks, you can't do that either. You can quick cook heart and actually make something out of it, but that's sort of an exception because it's cardiac muscle. It's the only place that exists. So, part of the challenge there is that the areas in which you have incredible flavor, you also have a texture which is initially becoming so rejected by people because they're revering texture over flavor. And so when people think about quality of meat these days, especially in America, the thing that they think about is texture. They think about how tender is the meat. And what they're not realizing is that as you're prioritizing this other category of tenderness, what you're losing is the value of flavor. And so movement, animal movement is one thing that develops these pre-flavor compounds. Another thing is age. The older the animal is, not only more of the workload is put onto those muscles, so it's a cumulative impact of this pre-flavor compound, but you also have the compounding of fat-soluble elements within the fat of the animal itself. So the longer an animal lives, the more diverse flavors it's going to have. You also have what develops flavor is diversity of diet. So you have the things that are within the area that the animal's living, that it's consuming. So the animal's now living in the area that it's supposed to, it's exhibiting natural behaviors, it's eating what it's meant to eat within its area, which isn't necessarily the same thing that same animal of that same breed is going to eat when it's in another area, which is where we also got into the discussion of terroir yesterday, and I get into that discussion, is the representation of time, but also place and region within flavor. You're not going to get that also with texture. So this is also part of the story of how these memories are created. So the things that are developing flavor within meat, you have animal movement, you have animal age, you have diversity of diet. Those are three main components that have to deal with that. These are all things that are in the face of what is promoted by industrialization. The things that promote tenderness are lack of movement or confinement. You have younger age, which means killing at a younger age. You have quickened growth, which we may know as subtherapeutic antibiotics or other ways to induce growth within animals. What's actually happening there is that the muscles are growing at such a quickened pace that they're not able to repair themselves, and you have a faux tenderness so that when the animal dies, you have this impression that it's more tender than it is, but it's actually damaged muscle tissue. So you have, pigs that are being killed at 6 months old instead of pigs that are raised through the winter. And the ones that we know that are raised through the winter are going to be able to be cured into something that's going to create an incredible story for people and are going to represent this incredible example of what this animal could be. Or you're going to have a 6-month-old animal that was raised in captivity, that was fed, a ratio of feed that was designed exactly for the development of X amount of pounds per X amount of feed, and then turns into something where we readily know that you can't even make up for that lack of flavor with what we can do post-mortem with the techniques that we have. So the potential that we have for flavor once the animal is dead is all based upon how we treat these animals while they're alive. Texture is a whole nother concept and something that can be handled through longer aging process. It can be handled through modern techniques of cooking. It can be through ways in which we butcher and we remove connective tissue and all these things that are part of this post-mortem process. So texture is something that can come, but flavor is never something that we can get back in there. So when I think about flavor, or when I think about the quality of meat for me, one of the things I caution people away from is it's not just about how great is that piece of meat that's in front of you right now. It's not about I spent X amount of dollars so I deserve to have this incredible piece of meat in front of me. There's a movement that's been happening for a long time that is really this fetishizing of meat, at least in America, where we have this narcissistic sort of view of what we deserve as far as what we're able to consume without looking beyond our own plate and our own individual experience. And to me, quality starts far, far away from that. Quality of meat for me is what was the quality of the life of the animal? What's the quality of the life of the farmer who's raising that animal? What's the quality of the community that that farm is within, in which the money that that farmer is bringing into that community is then supporting other small businesses that are around there? What is the quality of the actual nutrients that I'm getting through the food that's then feeding my family and feeding the people around me? And when all those things are actually in line, I don't have to worry about how great that steak is at the end once it's on my plate, because I know if those things are in line before that, it's going to be good. And it doesn't have to be the best steak I've ever had every time I sit down to eat meat, because I know that there are things beyond just my own narcissistic need to have great food every time I eat, because I think I deserve it, that I know that I'm participating in something that's far greater than just that meal itself. It's contributing to a community on a much, much greater level. And we get caught up, I think, so often in these ideas of like heritage breeds as well. And we think, this heritage breed is so great for this, or this heritage breed is so great for that. And heritage breeds do have great things to offer. But there's a regionality to heritage breeds too, for their own reason. They exist in a region because they developed over the course of time to support the conditions that are there, and therefore they offer something that's a hardiness that supports a cuisine that was developed there. And these things all come up together. And it's not that we need to look to what's the best breed as far as what's going to create the greatest quality product for this or that or this. If we want to make bacon, it might not be like, let's look the world over and see what's the best breed for me to make bacon, and I'm going to bring that onto my farm where I am. It might be more, where am I, and what grows best here, and then what can I make with that that's actually going to be the best. Okay, so I won't have the longest belly from that pig, but I'll probably make a better product because the pig I'm going to raise is meant to be raised here. and it's meant to be fed on what's in the area itself. And the product that's going to come from that is going to be a higher quality product than looking for these sort of these finite or these contained sort of ideas of what quality is dispersed throughout. Here's where the jet lag's kicking in. So, you know, quality for me, I travel around the country and I do a workshop that has to do with introducing people to mutton. Most people have never had mutton, and I work with farms all over the country that I've never worked with before. I have no prior experience with them, and I ask them, what's your oldest cull animal? And they're usually shocked, and they're usually, what? You know, you want to, and I'm like, they're like, well, I mean, we have this 7-year-old ram, and I'm like, I'll take it. We have a 6-year-old ewe, and I'm like, I'll take it. We have a 5-year-old wether, I'll take it. And I tell them, I want it killed this way, I want it aged this way, and I want it split in half and delivered to me, and I'm going to do this workshop with it. And I put myself at risk time and time again to introduce people to the idea of what mutton is in a situation in which they might be offended by the taste of it. Because in the end, everything that we say is bullshit if people don't actually like what they're eating at the end of it. I can talk about the virtues of eating mutton and eating dual-purpose animals and all this stuff till I'm blue in the face, but like if people don't like the taste of it, it like doesn't matter. And time again, I rely on that idea of, I know that this is a good farmer, I know that he's raising an animal in the way that it's supposed to be properly raised, I know that it's being killed in a way that is low stress, like what you were talking about. I'm aging it for long enough to deal with issues that might be issues with texture, and I'm the one who's butchering it, and I know that it's going to be butchered well, and in order to present people with an opportunity to taste meat that they would otherwise be rejecting. And I've never had a problem with people rejecting it. And that's because it doesn't matter what breed that sheep is, or what exactly was being raised in that field as far as alfalfa, or what types of grasses or things like this. And quality isn't just one idea of what quality is. It's going to taste different everywhere that I go, and every time I taste it, it's different, because it's the region that's being represented there, and that's part of the story, is that it's a time, and it's a place, and it's honoring the variability in that is paramount to really what's conveying quality in products, is that honors and has increased reverence for what the animals are. Because the animals can't create the consistency that we talked about yesterday with some people that burdens food so much. Consistency is something that is unnatural. And so trying to push that into something, I was talking about wine is one of the only areas of food that we celebrate inconsistency. But really, pastured meats is another one where we have such an opportunity to talk to people about the fact of celebrating the differences of where flavor can change from region to region based upon what's happening in that region, that season, that feed, all these other things that are breed related. So for me, there's of course is the saying quality over quantity. This is such an easy saying, but for me it ties into what I sign every book of mine with, which is step one, I think, eat less meat. This is an idea that we should all get around, is that people need to eat less meat, not eat no meat, but eat less meat. We eat too much meat. And then if we can get past that, it's about eating better quality meat. And then what does quality meat mean? I think that's individual to everyone in every region, but I think that has to do with everything beyond before it gets to the plate, And then once it's on the plate, because you've supported all these other things, that experience itself is going to feel and taste so much better. And with the flavor that's there and the story that's around it, it means that we continue to be able to make strong food memories by not prioritizing texture in and of itself.
All right, thanks. For sure, there's not room for 1 million questions, but we can have a few before we get into see if we can figure out what quality is in a manifesto kind of a way. Any questions?
Just to your basics again. How does it work? So you're going to these farmers, get meat or get an animal, a cow or a pig, whatever they have, an old one, you told us, And then how you do everything, how you kill them directly on this farm, and then how you...
I don't do the kill. I mean, sometimes I do the kill, but in the workshop format that I do is about this same topic. So basically, I take half of a carcass. Usually I deal with old goats or mutton animals. So two eschewed forms of meat that people reject by and large because they think it's going to be too tough and too gamey. These are the things that people always want to associate with those two areas. So instead we eat kid goats. When I first got into butchery and I would be at like parties and people would be like, what do? I'd be like, I kill kids and I eat them. And my wife would be like, you know, like so taken aback, and she'd be like, what the fuck? But it was sort of like, I'm trying to talk to people about like, you know, you don't want to obviously just be killing younger animals, you know? So anyway, the old goats, old sheep. And then I take half of an animal, I talk about why we group primals into areas like that, you know, based upon muscle function. The function of a muscle is what drives everything that we do with that muscle. You know, it's like how we cook it is based upon what that function does. Because how we cook it is based upon the presence of how much connective tissue and the thickness of fibers and all that stuff, and that has to do with the function of the muscle. So I talk about that, and then I take 12 muscles across the body, 12 specific muscles every time. And what those muscles are is it's the top round, it's the what some people call the merlot or velvet steak from the heel. I take the sirloin flap, I take the flank steak, I take the transverse abdominis, I take serratus ventralis, which is the muscle that goes across the ribs. I take infraspinatus, which is the flat iron. I take teres major, which is a shoulder tender. I take subscapularis, which is the blade steak, things like that. And then we cook them off, and people get to blind taste them. So people don't know what they're tasting, and the tenderloin. And then I also take the entire length of the loin, from where it starts at the pelvis to where it terminates in the shoulder, and I cut it into 3 distinct sections, where it changes function basically, changes workload, and then people get to taste the difference between a single muscle and how it actually can change within that muscle based upon its own workload. So then we do blind tasting, and then people talk about what their experience was, like what was the flavor, what was the tenderness, what was the juiciness, what was that, what did you like, what didn't you like, and then I tell people what muscles they were and why they experienced those. And my success is generally based upon, one, people not liking the tenderloin. I mean, it's the least flavorful muscle in the entire body, you know, and you know, the reason why we serve it with fatty sauces is because it has no flavor, and you overcook it quickly, and we wrap it in bacon, or we bard it, or we do something like that, and it's sort of like to make up for the fact. But it's the most tender muscle because it has no workload, and it's the, you know, it's the least working muscle. And then I talk about that compared to like infraspinatus, that flat iron, and which is such a great example of how the flat iron is a heavily working muscle. You see this articulation of the scapula when you see like dairy animals walking, and you know, and this movement of the scapula, but the workload is offset by the connective tissue that's centered around it. So when we learned a modern way of butchering, where you can denude that and you can split it into 2 and take out that middle sheet of connective tissue, which the workload is being centered on, you have muscle tissue that's surrounding it that has a lot of workload, so it has a ton of potential flavor, but it actually doesn't have the connective tissue interwoven so much throughout the muscle fiber. So it's the second most tender muscle in the body, but you have an incredible flavor that's with it. So you have these 2 very distinct like examples of how that can come about based upon muscle function, and blood flow, and other stuff. So you know, every time it's a different farm usually, and it's a different animal, and it's a different age, and it's a different sex, and I mean, and people are against, you know, male animals a lot of the time, and I'll be like, this is a buck, this is a ram, this is, you know, and you know, and boar taint is like a really popular thing to you know, get involved in. Most people have never tasted it. You know, the same compounds that are often responsible for boar taint are also similar compounds that are responsible for some of the off-putting flavors in sheep that people experience. So, you know, we get into some of those discussions. But my conversation with the farmer is, you know, what are you raising? How are you raising it? How old is it? What's your program? But most of the time, I don't even need to get into that. I get personal recommendations from people that I know good farms, and I say, hey, I'm coming into this area. I need a farm that's raising animals well, and then I tell them what I want, and then I tell them I want it aged for usually 10 to 14 days, hung, and then their processor usually is like, why the fuck is he aging it for so long? And then I get into that discussion, and that's it. So.
Thank you.
Other questions?
See, the questions are very short, the answers are quite long, but I feel there's a big interest here. So is there another questions? Or yes.
I wanted to ask.
So that's the final question, just
I'll
to
make it short.
put the bar for that one.
No, I'm the one who's
Oh,
supposed
you
to make
make
it
it
short.
short. What's your take on people's perception on quality?
Well-
You talked about all these points that contribute to quality, which are, connect a lot of people. And what about perception?
Well, I think a lot of it, the perception of quality is rooted in this idea of textureness. You carrying the quality of the meat itself, and when your eating experience when you eat like a large piece of meat that people don't realize is that you're really only getting a positive experience in those first couple bites. After that, the fat is enrobing your mouth. You're not able to get. I mean, the reason why we drink these tannic wines with fatty cuts is to cut through this fat so we can taste again and all these things. So, people's perception of quality is based upon what they've been told quality is a lot of the time. It's based upon education around what makes for quality and what questions to ask about what makes for quality, I think. And over the decades since the 70s, really post-World War II more, for us, is that we've been getting told that quality is based in tenderness and texture. That's what's going to be quality. It's sort of like melt in your mouth meat. What the fuck is that? You know what I mean? I enjoy chewing meat. So there's a toothsome quality for me that comes from, things like the serratus ventralis muscle, which has this incredible flavor, and you chew it. You don't want to be chewing it forever, but so there are these misnomers that are part of marketing to this idea that as they push the idea of quality more and more towards texture, there's so many ways that then they get away with all these things 5-week-old chickens that are raised so quickly that they have no flavor, they can't move around naturally, they're, 20-some% of them are dying from heart attacks, you have all these things, but the texture is great, you know what I mean? And it's sort of the texture is great because they don't move around much and they're babies and and so that sort of idea, but people don't know the right questions to ask. So I don't know. Is that answer? And I think when we start to focus on individual muscles, so many of the cuts that we eat in America are multi-muscle cuts. You have pork chops, you have all these middle meat steaks and all those formats, and now you have the man steak, the big thick cut sirloin steak, and you have all these other things that are these multi-muscle cuts. And you lose sight of the idea that individual muscles have individual needs at that point. Cooking an entire lamb leg is you can get a delicious outcome, but you're not taking into account how great you could make that lamb leg if you cut it into 4 subprimals and then cook them all individually the way that they're supposed to be cooked. And once you start focusing on individual muscles, you increase your reverence for them by appreciating them more. You inherently end up eating less because you don't eat as much when it's a smaller format. Just like chefs know, you pre-slice before you put on a plate. You don't need as much meat on the plate to satisfy the customer. It's the same sort of idea. It's you focus on an individual muscle, then you're no longer requiring the same volume in order to feel sated. It's a mental connection that's there, So I think all those things play into account, As you're talking about reverence for animals being part of tradition, one of the ways you increase reverence for animals is creating ways in which they can appreciate every part of this animal more for its individual characteristics. It's not just saying, oh, I appreciate animals more and now I'm going to eat this 36-ounce porterhouse steak, and that's going to be my reference, is that I'm going to appreciate it more. It's sort of appreciating it more means actually, I think, eating less of it for me and making it go further. And so now I'm rambling more.
All right.
I'm gonna fall
Thank
asleep
you
up there.
very much, Adam.